welcome to everybody who is joining us this morning. Welcome back to Stormwater Awareness Week. We're happy to have you here. And welcome to the wet weather, dry weather, and illicit discharges. Let's discuss the basics of IDDE workshop. It is 8 o'clock. So again, welcome to Stormwater Awareness Week. We're happy to have you here. Brad, if you'd like to introduce yourself, we can get started.
Absolutely. My name's Brad, and I am the subject matter expert and lead instructor for Stormwater One. We do online training and credentialing. Furthermore, I also do in-person training and qualification courses. On the slides, you'll see two QR codes. One is for our online at your own pace IDDE course, and then we have another one that is the advanced IDDE course. And for all of you who are part of Stormwater Awareness Week, when you sign up, you can put in the code right there, and that'll give you 15% off. So we'd love to see you expand your horizons. We have other courses as well. We just came out with an industrial stormwater manager course. So feel free to go to stormwater1.com. But today we're going to be talking about wet weather, dry weather, and illicit discharges. This is kind of an introductory segment to the IDDE. I'm not going to be able to get into the nitty-gritty of every single site. I mean, if you can imagine, I got people in Central Valley of California, and I've got people in Virginia, and I've got people in Nebraska, and I've got people all over the place. Your own municipal situation, wherever it is you are, you've got different climate, elevations, vegetation, you've got, the size of your town, the way it's laid out, all these different things. I can't possibly speak to all of those individual things. So this is going to be a higher level kind of introductory, and maybe even for some of you, a reminder, oh yeah, I forgot about that, about IDDE. I'm gonna kind of make an assumption here, and I could be definitely wrong. But I would like to say that probably most of you are working for a town, a city, a county, a DOT, a drainage district, something like that, where you have a jurisdictional boundary that you're responsible for. And so this segment today is supposed to help us kind of make sure we touch the major components that the IDDE course is going to cover in full that we have online. And if you got any questions, shoot them in the chat there. Gabriella's already put in there a couple of things. So make sure that you're following the chat as well as watching the screen. You don't have to watch me. I'm not going to be doing any flips or anything, so don't pay attention to my video feed. But it is there available for you if you just want to see the glare off of my bald head today. All right, we are a occupational registered trade school in the state of Connecticut, and we do work from coast to coast. So we'd love to help you in any way you can related to stormwater, erosion, sediment control, etc. So that's kind of where we hone in is being able to offer actual courses and classes. We're not a certification. A qualification prepares you to do the work. A certification just simply tests you to see if you know. So we're trying to do the front part. We're trying to qualify you by getting you the information you need there. In this session together, we've done the introduction here, and we're going to start talking about a few items, and then we'll jump into non-stormwater discharges, and then I will mention the 6 minimum control measures. If you are in a larger MS4 that's over 100,000 people, you will have more than the 6 minimum control measures. But for the majority of us, we're probably in that 10,000 to 100,000 people range. All these little dispersed communities across the U.S. And so we'll cover the 6 minimum control measures. That will give you a baseline to go from there up as far as what you need to be doing in your IDDE program. We'll talk about mapping and planning. I will mention some generating sites. And again, this is not meant to be an absolute exhaustive list of every single possible generating site that exists on the face of the planet, right? So we only have a certain amount of time. So I'll kind of hit the big ones, right? The big boys, so to speak. Then we'll talk about monitoring and inspections. So go back with me in time to 1987, the EPA issues the first of the three stormwater quality amendments to the Clean Water Act, which came out in 1972. And they are asking people to start managing construction. Okay. And it was for 20 acres and larger. And then in 1991, they came out with the first of the MS4 permits, and it was for large 100,000 or more people populations. And then in 2010, 11, 12, somewhere around there, depending on where you were in the US and when it hit you, they kicked people into what we call phase two MS4 permit requirements. That's the 10,000 people and above. And so that's where we are today, is we're there now because of that increased enforcement and requirements for the smaller MS4 operators. There are two major ones I've mentioned. The larger one, an example here, this is Maryland DOT, and it's the state of Maryland, and it's going to be all of the major roadways there in Maryland. That's a phase one. They impact over 100,000 people. And then a small phase two MS4, the example I have here is just a map of the city of San Marcos, Texas. It's a college town, Texas State University, which I'm old enough to know back in the day it was called Southwest Texas State University. But anyway, it's a Texas State University, and it's a small MS4. It's a phase two. So we're going to cover items that both are going to be required to handle, but kind of focusing more on the phase twos. The phase ones have been around, been around longer, and B, kind of have an idea of what they're supposed to be doing. So the phase twos, we're still playing catch up here, even after 10 to 12 years later. We're still playing catch up on trying to get all these phase two MS4s up to speed on what they're supposed to be doing. As a reminder, this is very elementary, but as a reminder, because I want us to make sure we're all on the same page here, there are three different kind of pipe systems underneath the ground, right? The first one is fresh water. That could be from a municipal water supply. It could be a drinking water supply, whatever. It could be a well on a site, or a well that distributes drinking water to a number of homes or businesses, right? So we have the drinking water system, and then when you wash your clothes, that dirty water that gets flushed out of there, toilets after they're being used, etc., those are emptying out, and those are going into a sanitary sewer line. And that sanitary sewer line, if you'll remember with me, you go back to watch the movie Finding Nemo, and that scene in the dentist office. You've seen Finding Nemo, right? So they go into, this is not a spoiler alert, but you go into the dentist office, and they're all trying to get out of the fish tank, and they're trying to go down the drain or get flushed down the toilet. And so the idea that they have, that they keep saying, is all drains lead to the ocean. Well, if you worked in any sort of municipal operations, yeah, drains do lead to the ocean, but not a direct path. They hit a big hurdle that they don't mention in the movie on the way to the ocean, and that's the wastewater treatment plant, right? So we have this maybe big obstacle that they're going to hit, where the fish would get ground up and the liquids and solids separated and all this kind of stuff. So, but there's a sanitary sewer in the ground. And then we have our storm drains that might be in the ground, our storm sewer system. And if you notice, the freshwater supply, that's effectively clean water, right? And then you have the sanitary sewer once it gets to the wastewater treatment plant, or sometimes you have an on-site sewerage facility, or maybe like a large septic system of some sort. So when the wastewater comes out of a house or a business, it's being managed, right? Either through filtration through the layers of soil there, or going to a wastewater treatment plant. But the stormwater, any pollutants that might be on the surface, they're able to then go straight down into the catch basin, into the storm drain, and enter into the waterway. And so historically, there's really been no treatment to those things. Now, over the past 20 years or so, we've really began to implement a number of hydrodynamic separators, inlet-based treatment systems, et cetera, to really kind of try to capture the surface pollutants before they run off of the site and enter into those systems. But in the meantime, we have a lot of systems that are older, and so we haven't done a retrofit of everything at this point. And so we have a lot of older systems where surface pollutants are still allowed to discharge down. So, and instead of trying to, put a filtration system on every single drain that's been there for 100 years, we're now trying to let's prevent those pollutants from going onto the ground or discharging from that site in the first place. And that's kind of what this idea of IDDE is about. So let's define this real quick. What is the basic definition here of illicit discharges? And the basic definition is this: they are just simply a storm drain discharge that has some sort of measurable flow, like I can see there's something there. And it's typically important for us to remember to do this during dry weather, because when there's wet weather, when it's rain or you have a lot of snow melt or something, you're going to have water flowing through there, and it's going to be very difficult to detect any problems. But if it's been a number of days or weeks or even months since the last rainfall event and there's still water coming out of the storm sewer system, we might have a problem. We might need to actually go and investigate what's going on there. And so these illicit discharges typically contain pollutants or pathogens that we don't want to enter into our surface water. They typically will originate from an impervious surface. So they're coming off of asphalt, concrete, pavers, etc. That's the place where they're coming out the most. That doesn't mean that they can't also come off of unpaved territory. They could. Somebody spilled a bunch of oil onto the ground, and it rained. That, of course, oil floats on top of water, so that would discharge. But most of the time, we can find that these pollutants are coming off of impervious surfaces. And so some of the major places that we need to keep really close eyes on would be apartments, dense home development, where a lot of people are living there, car washes, even restaurants. I had a restaurant on the other side of town that they had grease traps behind the restaurants, and they weren't maintaining their grease traps the way they were supposed to. And so the grease would fill all the way to the top for, I think there was 3 other restaurants there. Amazing food, but the grease traps weren't being maintained. And so it filled up all the way to the top, overflowed onto the pavement, and then when it rained, it washed it down into the storm sewer. Now, thankfully, there on that site, there was a hydrodynamic separator that had been installed, excuse me. And that captured those fats, oils, and greases that were trying to discharge out the storm sewer there. But then it created a biome environment where those algae and bacteria went nuts. There was more colors and smells when I opened that thing than I've ever had in my entire life. So these are the kind of things where we're focusing on for these illicit type discharges. So what we have to imagine is that if you have a on-site sewage, you have a septic system, and it's not being maintained properly. If that fills up and you get a large amount of rain, some of that rain might seep into the system. That could cause the system to then overflow and discharge out of there, as well as our wastewater treatment plants. Our wastewater treatment plants, they are vital to modern urban development, but it's a double-edged sword because they also have a huge component of chemicals and bacteria, which we don't want to go into our receiving waters. And there even some of the older systems, looking at like Chicago up in the Northeast, et cetera, some of these older systems, we're trying to pull them out of rotation, but they have it where if it rains and the sanitary sewer system can't handle it completely, then there's like a wall in there and it'll overtop that wall and it's combined sewer overflow. So we don't want those to be in play. We're trying to work slowly, I think, to get all those out of play. But these all kind of trace back to these areas. And then we know that there are some places where there are particular sites that have what we call they're known generating sites. That just means we know for a fact these are like ones that we've got to really keep an eye on to make sure that they're not discharging any pollutants into the waterway. So having a basic understanding of what these generating sites are should help us to understand our inspection and monitoring procedures and locations within our jurisdiction. So are all discharges the same? Well, the simple answer is no. I mean, if I'm in a small town and I don't have really any manufacturing stuff going on there, and I just have, farms around the outside of town, and I just have some retail and general store type stuff or whatever, my types of discharges there are going to be vastly different than if I'm in a dense manufacturing industrial operating, area. And so an illicit discharge is still, we want to prevent those pollutants from discharging out into the receiving water, but what we're chasing is going to be different based on where you are. Actually, why we kind of have to fly at a high level. You can imagine everybody here, I mean, from Edgewater, Florida to Columbus, Nebraska, we got huge swings in what all these different sites are and what their potential pollutant loads might look like coming out of there. Now, that being said, the MS4 permit that you're operating under does allow for a handful of non-stormwater discharges. And so non-stormwater means not from rain or snow melt. And these waters are allowed to discharge, but I'm going to put an asterisk next to that. We're going to talk about that for the next couple of minutes here. So one of the non-stormwater discharges that would be allowed is firefighting activity, allowing us to prevent a building from burning down. If we can get that to stop or whatever, we're going to spray the water on there, and that is an allowable non-stormwater discharge. The only caveat to that would be what is in that building, or what is that building made of? We need to think about that before it catches on fire. I wouldn't want a dry cleaner chemical distribution center to catch on fire and us just spray water on it and call that good, because if any of those storage containers, any of those totes has some sort of compromise to allow those dry cleaner chemicals out of there, we want to have protocols in place that we can prevent those from leaving with the firefighting water. And as Mel mentioned, a lot of these firefighting activities, depending on what you're doing, they have some sort of surfactant added to it, and that's to help coat and snuff out the fires. And so all of those would have to have kind of pre-planning in place to make sure that we understand that there is a potential for other pollutants besides just water from the fire hose coming out of there. So again, it is an allowable non-stormwater discharge, but I think if we're all here because we want to learn and we want to do better, we have to remember that there's going to be some places where we have to put in additional control measures to offset those potential discharges from the site. Another non-stormwater discharge would be fire hydrant flushing. That's one of those things that you just drive down the road, you splash through the water. So where's this water coming from? It hasn't rained in 2 weeks. And you reckon, oh, there's a fire hydrant. We're flushing a fire hydrant. That's okay. The caveat to this would be if the fire hydrant is spraying water onto a pollutant source, onto a used oil pan or something, I don't know, whatever. And that could be discharging pollutants from the site. Or if the fire hydrant is flushing onto bare dirt, bare soil, and it's causing erosion, then we're discharging sediments out of there. So we've got to be careful about where these things are placed. Be obviously mindful of all the different environment around those so that we can prevent the discharge of any pollutants, even when we're doing something as mundane as flushing fire hydrants here. One of the other ones is washing of vehicles and equipment. You are allowed to pressure wash. The idea behind this is it's not in complete disrepair. It's not like the hood's missing and you're washing, oil, off the engine onto the ground, whatever. We're washing the outside. And the idea is the outside of the vehicle, it's going to have dirt that would otherwise end up on the roadway anyway, right? We're just washing it off so that the vehicle's clean, that leave the dirt on site. And so we actually have an ability to do that, to wash off equipment, but we wouldn't want to discharge any sediment-laden water off the site. And the caveat for the whole thing is that we can't have any soaps, solvents, or detergents in our wash water. So as soon as we mix in that soap with that sprayer and we're washing it, now it's a non-allowable discharge. So we can't allow that to discharge into our storm drain. If you have these self-service car washes, like what you see in this image here, they will have to have a collection system of some sort that either needs to be cleaned out or otherwise goes to the sanitary storm sewer. I mean, it's now sanitary sewer, not storm, sanitary sewer, so that water can be treated at the wastewater treatment plant prior to discharge into the receiving waters. Mel also made a note here. She said, in California, the temporary crash cushions are filled with potable water, and sometimes they are near bridges. When they empty them, they need to make sure it doesn't flow into the water body. Yeah. So again, those plastic crash barriers that are on roadways and highways, they're filled with potable water sometimes non-potable water, depending on where you are. But we need to make sure that those are not flowing into the water body. They could have gone septic at that point. They could have, whatever. They could have multiplied bacteria in there or whatever. So we want to make sure that we're careful about discharging all of the water from these areas. Another one that is an allowable non-stormwater discharge is dust control. And depending on where you are, I know there are certain areas that just, oh, it must be potable water, or it can be potable or non-potable water. Potable for all of us, just a reminder means I can drink it, safe to drink. And the idea here is we're just putting enough liquid, enough water onto the surface to prevent the uplift of wind to pick up those dust particles, right? If we're putting so much dust control water down that it's causing erosion, that's obviously a problem. So again, as you hear me saying this, I'm saying like it's an allowable by permit, but we also have to be mindful of this stuff over here. So it's kind of both sides of the spectrum here. Pressure washing of a building, that is an allowable non-stormwater discharge, provided there's no soaps, solvents, or detergents. And again, that rain's already going to hit the stuff that may be on there, some algae or whatever, just dust collected there. It's already going to hit that. Some of it's going to discharge. And so we're just saying, hey, we're expediting that process, and we're just washing that stuff off the surface. And if we don't have any soap, solvents, detergents, it can go through our system. But if we have, if we have soap, solvents, detergents, some sort of acid wash or something, then we have to collect that and then, take a vacuum truck or a pump truck and suck that material up and then haul it to the wastewater treatment plant to get processed properly. Furthermore, if we have paints or caulks or anything like that that have PCBs, those would also be something of concern, because if you end up, pressure washing and some of that stuff comes off, that would end up into our surface water, and that's not allowed as well. So understanding the materials that the building is made of and what is on the surface is key to understanding, your compliance there. And if you need to put some sort of acid, soap, detergent, whatever, to do the wash to make it worth your while to make the building clean, then you would need to plug up all the drains and then let the water collect and then remove that water before you allow the surface runoff to exit from the site. Another one in the same vein is going to be pressure washing of pavement areas, parking lots, etc. Provided there's no spills or leaks of toxic or hazardous substances on the ground. If you're looking at the football stadium downtown and you're going to pressure wash the parking lot, you're allowed to do that with no soaps, solvents, or detergents or acids. But if you know that somebody had a problem and their car was leaking oil all over the place, you can't use the pressure washer to wash the oil off the parking lot down the storm drain. That's not allowed. You have to deal with that area first, maintain and clean up that spot, and then you can go through and do your pressure washing of your paved area. So we want to make sure that we're not discharging and just removing it from our site and sending it downstream for someone else to deal with. And someone else to deal with is likely one of you, because that's part of, like I said, I'm assuming most of you are working for some sort of MS4. And so they're just saying, well, we'll let them handle that, right? Another allowable non-stormwater discharge is going to be condensation from your air compressors, from your air conditioning systems, etc. It just takes atmospheric water and discharges it down into the ground. If you can let that go onto a grassed or dirt landscape area of some sort, that's even better, because then that water can soak in and be utilized by the plants and vegetation. If you can't, you can allow it to flow across the parking lot or across the sidewalk or whatever. I have a client that they do fiberglass conduit and pipes and fiberglass street lamps and stuff like that. And their air compressor is huge, because that's how they hold the molds open, is they put compressed air inside of them. And the discharge line for the condensate that they put on the outlet of the air compressor is made of galvanized pipe. And so it's actually causing rust. And now there's big rust stains coming out, and that's dropping right down to the storm sewer. So I'm working with them right now to, hey, let's change this out. You're allowed to discharge the water. You can't discharge rusty water out of there. So we're changing that over to like a PVC discharge line. It's not under pressure. It's just the condensate that's discharging. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about your non-stormwater discharges. If you're on a site that is pretty blessed and has a uncontaminated, non-turbid discharge of groundwater or spring water, that's an allowable. You can leave that spring flowing there. That's okay, as long as it's not causing additional erosion and it's not in contact with any of the pollutants on the site. You're allowed to let that water flow across the site. So keep that in mind. If you have a foundation footing or a footing drain, you're allowed to let that water that seeps through the ground and enters into those drains and then discharges out onto, a lower area of the site or out into a storm sewer. That's okay as long as there's no known pollutants that are entering into that system. So this is another one where, how are we gonna, I don't have X-ray vision, so I can't look into these things. And as long as there's dirt and grass and landscaped area around here, then conceivably the water that's flowing through the ground and entering into this footing drain is okay. And so that's the idea behind that. The next one is going to be water that's used to irrigate grass or landscaped areas. Those are allowed pending they don't cause erosion or otherwise spray water over top of a pollutant area. So we want to make sure that we're mindful of the various zones around our site to make sure that we have to prevent that excess non-rainwater from coming in contact with those areas where it would cause a problem. Anita says California Phase 1 permits require larger water purveyors to have coverage in the state's potable drinking water, which has required BMPs for fire hydrant flushing and other potable water discharge. Also, California just released a draft Phase 2 permit, and I'm not sure if this requirement made it into that permit too. Okay, so you've got to make sure that you have coverage there for BMPs for fire hydrant flushing. I wouldn't drink water out of a fire hydrant, but it is coming from the same sources, as I understand it, that our potable drinking water supply is coming from. And so part of the flushing there is to make sure that we're not allowing that water to become non-potable by it sitting there and causing, undue accumulation of sediments and other stuff inside those things. The other one that is allowed to flow across the site if it's not from stormwater, like not directly from rainwater, is if the water is flowing through a riparian zone, an established riparian zone. Riparian is the root from a French word that just means the shore. So if you've got water that's flowing off of a site and it goes through a riparian zone, these brushy, tree-lined areas along the sides of a stream, lake, river, whatever, you're allowed to let the water flow through those. They also do a great job of bioremediation. And so they'll help to filter out any potential pollutants that might be flowing through there. Now, they're gonna filter out the Coke cans and the Starbucks cups, but they're not going to actually decompose those. They're not going to metabolize those. So those still need to be picked up and hopefully prevented from going there in the first place. Now, Anthony says, MS4 permit says you can't wash your car with soap in your driveway. So depending on your MS4 permit, there is some proviso in there that says if an individual homeowner is going to wash their singular vehicle in their driveway, they may be allowed to use soap there. Okay, you have to look at your permit and see the way it's worded. What I have suggested is if I'm in, I'm picking on Dave again, if I'm in Columbus, Nebraska, what I might do is I might actually go in and say, hey, if you're within our city limits or our county limits or whatever, we highly recommend you utilize X, Y, or Z car wash because it would be biodegradable or whatever. It wouldn't damage our receiving waters that we're in, and you could use that for public awareness and public participation. And what I also suggest is, especially in those small towns, you go to the general store or the Walmart or the AutoZone or whatever your car place is in Napa, and you just put a sticker on the car wash or a little display there and says, hey, this is the recommended, City of Columbus, Nebraska recommended car wash. And we'll even give you $1 off or whatever. That way you kind of funnel people into using the detergent that you're hoping for, right? So if the water from that person's car wash is somehow going into a sanitary sewer, it's going to be managed. But if it's going straight down the storm drain and into the creek that flows behind their house, out of that neighborhood or whatever, then depending on the way it's worded in your MS4 permit. And again, that we've got 150 people on today's session. You can imagine the wide array of wording that's in there. But that would be something that you would focus on. I mean, I don't want to tell someone they can't wash their vehicle, but I also have a job to do. I also have a permit that I have to meet, right? And so I might recommend that they actually go in and focus on the components that I can help. Control is too strong of a term, but help kind of funnel people into those car wash soaps that'll be the least harmful to our receiving waters. So those are the kind of things that you can do. You have leverage as an MS4 to do that kind of stuff, right? You have the ability to say, hey, we really need to focus on this. I don't want to say flat out, just ban whatever. That's really not helpful either, because people hate when you just tell them no. It's like my kids, I tell them no, you can't do that. The next thing they're doing, they're reaching over there to go touch that thing, right? So we don't want to do that either, but we just want to say, hey, we recommend, we really want to highlight, we really want to celebrate people who are utilizing these instead. Now, if it's a commercial car wash, if there's dozens of vehicles going there a day, those people really, you need to focus on those, because those become a generating site, right? Because they're really getting a lot of sediment laden water and soaps and detergents and all that kind of stuff that would accumulate and discharge potentially from that site. So we really want to focus on those. I mean, my neighbor across the street, he washes his car every weekend. I don't ever wash my car. I do the drive-through thing, once a month, and then so someone else is dealing with the discharge from that. I'm just too lazy to go out there and scrub my car. So that's just, and that's just part of it, right? So the next one is going to be the 6 minimum control measures. This is very rough. This is very broad here, but what I want you to know is that the first one is going to be your public education and outreach, letting people know within your jurisdictional boundary that whether they're residents, industry, commercial, construction, whatever it is, that there's a purpose for why you're asking them to not discharge pollutants into the surface runoff, right? You're kind of getting them aware. A lot of people still have the Finding Nemo idea that, oh, all drains into the ocean is perfectly fine, is whatever. Well, time out. Yes, when we flush water down the toilet, that does go to the wastewater treatment plant. But my surface water, like you talked about, if everybody on the block washed their cars in their driveways, we'd have a plume of uh, car wash soap that's going to end up entering into our receiving water. So letting people know that that's the case. Sometimes if they don't know, they don't know any better. But now we have the ability to really tell them that we need to make those changes in the process. I just realized I had the participants there. I don't know if that was over the screen, but hopefully it didn't block you enough to prevent you from seeing that. Number 2 is going to be public participation, and that is just simply trying to get people to be involved in the stormwater management program that you have in place. That could be something like, hey, let's go clean up underneath the bridge on Jones Creek, or it could be adopt a county mile or whatever. Those kind of things are helping get the pollutants out of the waterways and gives people a chance to serve and volunteer. And some people have, oh, I'll get an extra credit at school if I do volunteer, or I'll get a $50 bonus gift card if I go serve someplace and whatever. So those are great. And those are something you got to offer those things at least annually within your permit there. Number 3 is going to be your illicit discharge detection, which we're going to go into more detail here in a moment. Number 4 is going to be the construction site management. And so you have construction going on within your city limits or your county or whatever it is. And so your goal is to make sure that those people are actually following through with their construction general permit requirements for their particular site. So you're kind of the first line of defense to help them meet their state or EPA construction permit guidelines. Number 5 is going to be all of the post-construction runoff. And so this is talking about your permanent detention ponds, retention ponds, any of my, this is a really rough part of town for whatever reason. And we've got a lot of industrial discharge coming out of here or whatever. So we want to make sure that these areas are being monitored to make sure that they're functioning properly. There's no major discharges of pollutants out of there. If there is like a detention pond, I want to make sure that it's flowing into and out of it properly so it doesn't flood that site or neighboring sites, et cetera. So I know a lot of you are doing kind of the stormwater quality permanent BMP maintenance and inspections now, which is that's the requirement there. Number 6 is going to be the good housekeeping for you, the municipal operator. Make sure that you are keeping up with your wastewater treatment plant to make sure that your salt pile for the winter time is not just flowing right out of the site. Make sure that you're updating and maintaining your vehicles and not changing oil right on the ground someplace or whatever. So it's just kind of self inspection and self making sure your own operations are within the guidelines of the permit as well. You're not asking others to do what you're not doing. Okay, so that's number 6. All right, one of the requirements of the MS4 permit is to identify on a map all of the high-risk dischargers. So, hey, these are the potential bad boys within our jurisdictional boundary. Also to identify your outfalls. This is where not just this neighborhood empties out here, but this neighborhood might have multiple, culverts that empty out into this receiving stream or whatever. And so you want to make sure that you also note any sensitive areas or other areas that might have additional monitoring. Like we have a spring that's over here. We want to really protect that area so we don't, cause pollutants to sully up our spring or something like that. So some of these sites, like I talked about, they're called known dischargers, and we're calling them generating sites. But having an accurate map is going to be key to understanding where is my receiving waters in relation to our jurisdictional boundary. Where are the key places that really need to have additional, above and beyond the minimum inspection and monitoring for those areas, and that you can kind of prioritize your field investigations based on those areas. Or hey, we had other side of town, we weren't worried about it, but there was boom, we found somebody spilled something or dumped something or whatever. So we need to keep an eye on that. So it kind of helps you prioritize your field investigations. Now you can use digital, you can use paper. It doesn't matter, kind of whatever your budget and your staff can handle. I think digital is going to be the way people end up going, but having a database where you can actually keep up with, hey, I inspected, Bob Jones inspected this one a year ago. I'm inspecting it this year, all that kind of stuff. Having a track record, having a database is key. So you can do that. An Excel spreadsheet will work just fine, but having a place where you can click on that asset on a map and it'll pull up all the data for that particular location. That's also huge because it can give you background information as to what was there previously, or man, I saw some staining on the ground out here last year and the staining is still here. Has it gotten any worse than it was last year? Let me click on the asset and I can go to the pictures from last inspection. Oh, it looks about the same. We just never cleaned up that area. Okay, good. So no, it's not worse than it was before. All right, so great. So those are items that help you kind of understand how to investigate and do your inspections and monitoring. So speaking of generating sites, there are some kind of major ones, and we'll cover those real quick. In the process of doing that, by the way, creating your map, I forgot, I'm talking about this for a second. If you say, hey, there's a pipe coming out of the stream bank and it's emptying water from someplace, I don't even know where this thing's coming from, right? This was built 100 years ago. The pipe still seems to be in pretty good shape, but man, I don't even know where this water coming out of this pipe is originating. So you can do something that's called the dye test, and that is where you can just put down a non-toxic dye, biodegradable dye, and you can put it into, okay, we're going to drop it into this storm sewer junction box or manhole here, and then we'll monitor and see which one of these pipes it comes out of. Okay, so I don't know exactly how it's getting there, but that area is coming to this particular pipe. So you can kind of reverse engineer your underground system, especially for the older ones. The newer ones, I'd say in the last 50 years or so, really have a pretty good handle on where most everything is. But if it's older than that, you really start getting into the, I don't know, man. That was put in a long time ago, right? So that may be difficult to track that stuff. The other thing that you need to have is a standard operating procedure manual. So that way, hey, I found this here's what we do. And everybody has the same thing. I found this, I got to do this immediately, and then I got to report this to this, this title, this person, this position within the group. And if it's this level, then I escalate it to that person or whatever. So have a standard operating procedure. If you haven't done that, you really need to work on doing that. Now, the generating sites. Number one for the MS4s is going to be your wastewater treatment plant. Like I said, very, very important for modern urbanization. Very, very important to prevent all this stuff from discharging out of here. So you want to make sure you are checking this thing, and you have people on site on these things, I'm going to say almost every day. So make sure that they're doing the walk around, drive around inspections just to check for any potential issues. If they're looking at the same thing every day, they're going to notice a difference. They're going to notice a change. Oh, that leak wasn't here yesterday. What's going on here, right? Or whatever. That crack in the wall that's new. I don't remember seeing that before, right? I am always a big fan of taking pictures. That way I can go back. Well, what was that like last week? No, that crack was there, but it's bigger now. That crack's bigger now. I can see that now. So taking pictures is huge. You don't have to keep them forever, but man, having a track record to kind of keep an eye on the progress, the deterioration, I should say, not even progress, because as you know, all things in our universe eventually deteriorate, break down, and even plants and humans, right? We all end up, passing away one day. So we're all destined to deteriorate. And so anything that we build is new for that moment, but then it begins the process of slow deterioration. So keeping an eye on tracking that progress is important. If you have a septic system or an on-site sewer facility, it may not be run and operated by the MS4. I get that, but you want to make sure that they're being maintained on their own site, because if those things start overflowing, that's a problem, because then that surface water pollutant could then flow down across the surface of the ground into the receiving stream that is your responsibility. So you still have to have a plan in place for those septic systems that are on site and maintained and operated by those individuals. You want to make sure that those are being maintained and inspected on a regular basis to prevent those discharges from ending up in the surface waters. When you're looking around, you're looking for signs of any changes in the clarity. Is there floating solids, settled solids, suspended solids? Is there a foam? Is there some sort of sheen? Is there some sort of, milkiness, opaqueness in the water that wasn't there before? You're looking for changes in the water. So obviously something's coming out of that pipe there. And so, where is that coming from? Now, if you already have it mapped, you can say, hey, it's going to be one of these 3 inlets over here, or one of these 8 inlets over here, or whatever. You can track it down, or it may be longer than that. It may be coming from half a mile away, but you're able to track it down and kind of focus your investigation, knowing where that's coming from. And that's where the map comes into play. If you have used oil or grease traps, fats, oils, and grease, separators, that kind of stuff, make sure that they're being inspected and maintained on a regular basis. And furthermore, if it's at all possible, you should not allow them to put them right next to the storm drain. That is just a discharge waiting to happen, right? So this is a major issue right here. Not because that amount of oil is gonna, cause the world to end. That's not it. What we're saying is, if we're responsible for what goes down that storm drain, then I got to prevent that oil that's on the ground there from ending up in that storm drain. And that means they've got to do a better job of maintaining, cleaning, and operating their used oil facility in this particular location. Another thing that we have to keep in mind on is any motor oil, antifreeze, gas, diesel, any spills at these gas stations, fueling stations, maintenance, vehicle maintenance facilities, car shops, auto shops, salvage yards, etc. They have a high potential to discharge these pollutants into our waterway. And as you know, if oil, diesel, gas floats on the surface of the water, I can't just wash this stuff away, because that would discharge it out of the site. We've got to have plans in place, and each one of these facilities needs to have a plan in place with the proper spill kit and action response plan for anything that might happen on their site. And so that may be something you can provide to them, or maybe something that you request them to give you a copy of, so that way they have it. the simpler it is to understand, the more likely they're going to actually follow through with it. But if for some reason, they're just unwilling or unable to do that, you might need to provide that. And you could, a very similar, spill response plan for a gas station could be for all the gas stations in your jurisdiction. But you want to make sure that there's something there that people can read and understand and can follow through, because this is a real high potential for discharge from these particular sites. Your MS4 permit also requires that you identify and control the pollutants within your jurisdictional boundaries. That means I have to have my eyes on where all the discharges are into these surface waters. If it's covered up with overgrown vegetation, if it's hard to reach, whatever, I might need to clear a path so I can get down there and do my inspections and monitoring on a frequent basis. I want to make sure it's accessible, right? If you're operating a municipal landfill, which I know a lot of them are privately held and run, but if you have a municipal landfill, you have additional guidelines that you must follow along the way. But if you have a privately run one, then you're simply following up to make sure that they're meeting their requirements. If you've ever been to one of those places, they're not my favorite place on the planet. And that disgusting juice that comes out of those piles is not something I want into the waterway when I go to put my boat into the water to go fishing, right? So we want to make sure that these are being maintained, they're managing their potential pollutant load to the maximum that they can. And then we just want to make sure, look over their shoulder, make sure that they're doing that. They're essential. We got to have them, but man, we want to make sure that they're also not causing havoc and everything else around them, right? So we also have any place that has hazardous waste treatment, storage, disposal, recovery, transportation, etc. We want to make sure that they are following all the protocols and procedures for what those potential pollutants are, right? I know that there are certain chemicals that you can just put in a drum and like they're now, basically inert at that, right? Unless they got out of that drum. There are others that if it had, if you dropped it too hard, it would cause a chain reaction and you would have, it would be very bad. So they need to understand the potential problems associated with whatever chemicals they have. And if they don't even know what chemicals they have, that's a problem. So that's where it kicks you into the multi-sector general permit, or the industrial stormwater permit, it's also called. That's where they have to have their plan in place for how they're going to manage their potential pollutants from their site. And so you're just following up to make sure that they're doing that. So those are key areas. That's a key generating site. If you have a facility that has some sort of toxic release inventory where they're releasing particulates into the air, if you've got a prevailing wind that's from the southeast to the northwest, let's say, then that plume that might come out of there, that it's been permitted, but those particulates, what goes up must come down. So those particulates may be landing in that southeast and northwest up from that facility. So we need to be checking and monitoring the surface pollutant load on the ground in that area. So those are an area that you might be flying under your radar, but you need to make sure that you have those areas that you can check to make sure that it's not just accumulating to a toxic level on the ground. If you've got any of those industrial, like I said, scrap yards, salvage yards, etc., that any surface runoff from those places, I don't care how long you leave the drain plug out of an old car and drain the oil. As soon as I have that car, I was working the Port of Houston. They had a huge recycling facility, and they would drop whole cars into this blender, blend them up, and they would come out with fist-sized pieces of metal. So I don't care how long you drained the radiator or the motor at that point, there's still residue in there. And so now that it's been exposed, then anytime it rains, those are going to come off of that stack of recycled metal until it gets put on the barge and hauled off to get burned, melted down again. So we've got to make sure that those locations that we're following through with what's the discharge coming out of those sites, do they have BMPs that are going to prevent the discharge of those pollutants from those particular sites? Kayla says, could you elaborate on fertilizer and pesticide use in residential lots or commercial lots? We're going to get to that in just a moment. Absolutely. If you have a place that, hey, they're just, deliberate illegal dumping, that's a problem. I know that there are certain cities that have put up some game cameras to catch and get license plates of those people that are dumping, because it costs city resources to time and money to go out there and have people pick that up. We should be preventing that from happening. And part of that may be they don't understand that there's that not only does it take time and money, tax dollars to do that, but it also is potentially discharging pollutants into our surface runoff there. And then contractors, man, I can't tell you, there's a number of sites around town where contractors go to that dead end road and they just dump all their stuff because they don't want to go pay the fee to go dump it as a commercial entity. And so those are known sources as well. So we want to make sure that they're being dealt with as well and managed. Now, going into industrial dumping, if there's something that's on the site that I don't want to eat or drink, I certainly don't want it in the waterway. So we need to make sure we're identifying those sources and then we're managing them. And sometimes people, you manage one area and they're like ant mounds, right? I killed this ant mound, but I didn't actually kill it. They just moved 10 feet over in my yard. I'm like, oh, there's another ant mound, but it's the same colony. They just moved over there, right? So the same thing here. These industrial dumps like this, a lot of times they'll just find the next thing. So we have to be vigilant in investigating and inspecting our jurisdictional boundary to make sure that we're keeping track of where those places are. Going back to your question, Kayla, about fertilizer, pesticide, et cetera, irrigation is an allowable non-stormwater discharge. We talked about that earlier, but it can become a source of illicit discharge if you don't manage the rate at which you're putting down pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, et cetera. And so, especially if I'm in an area where my water is discharging into a waterway that's already been identified as having a problem with nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, et cetera, I want to make sure that we're actually following through and helping people understand, hey, we've already got an excess amount of nitrogen or phosphorus in this waterway. I'm not saying don't put fertilizer down, but what I'm saying is you need to do it under this rate, this many times a year, et cetera. And if you need to, this is not the conversation today, but chemically derived fertilizer versus organic fertilizer, chicken poop and horse manure and all the other stuff. So you really have to go through there. Furthermore, grass clippings, leaves that fall from the trees. We're about to start seeing leaves start falling from the trees here in the next couple of months. Those ending up in the waterway can really change your chemical oxygen demand and all that kind of stuff. So we really have to make sure that we're focusing on the public awareness. That's why the item number one is number one, because the public awareness, a lot of times they're not aware of the impact that it can have to your watershed. And if they don't, then they're just doing hey, this is just what I'm doing for myself. Who cares about everybody else? But the more that they're aware of the impact that it could have for the receiving waters and the people around them, I think more people are willing to participate. You're not going to get 100% participation. One of my favorite movies is Batman: The Dark Knight, and the butler, he says, he's telling that story, and he's like, towards the end, he's telling a story, and he's like, some people just want to watch the world burn. And I think there are still those people here on the planet, which is terrible, but majority of people, given the information, they'll want to participate and be a part of the solution. So they'll pitch in there. Stormwater ordinances can be created by you, the MS4, to help address some of these things. And so you want to have outfall screening. Make sure that you put notices. Hey, there's a discharge into the waterway from Bob Jones' neighborhood here or whatever. Please alert us if you see any changes into the water coming into this area or whatever. And get the public involved. Get them calling in for you. You got to do a visual inspection of every outfall, every single one. Obviously, don't do this when it's raging water pouring out of here. And furthermore, like I mentioned earlier, it's probably better to do it when it's dry, because there's no water flowing out of here like from a rainfall or snow melt, but we've still got some water trickling. Where's this water coming from? And does it have any pollutants in it? Oh, this is coming from a car wash or whatever. It helps you to understand when you do it in a dry weather. You need to do the qualitative analysis for each of these as well. The simple one is just color, odor, turbidity, floatables, sediments, etc. Is there sheen on there? That kind of stuff. You can just grab a plastic cup or a glass jar and just put it in there and just take a scoop and just kind of analyze that, right? There are certain places where you will also have to do on top of that quantitative analysis, and that's going to require some more sophisticated field equipment, maybe even laboratory scrutiny. And so it's going to help you understand, the level of pH, the temperature, the conductivity, the ammonia, Chlorine, is there surfactants coming from someplace? Potassium, detergents, dissolved oxygen, fluoride, fluorescents, phenols, fecal coliform, all these things. You can't really see that just by looking at it, right? So you may have to go into a quantitative analysis to get those checked out. But some of those are what we call known triggers. And so it's like, boom, it popped up. We got phenols in here. Uh-oh, now we got a problem. Let's chase it back to the source from this point in the stream where I took this, and let's try to figure out where this is coming from, right? Part of putting your map together is also requiring you to get a measurement of each of the discharge pipes, what they're made of, their material, what size they are, how long they are, location, even it would be good to have elevation. And so you need to have that on your map, but you're required to do the visual inspection every year to make sure there's no changes in that, right? If one of these pipes had started pointing a different direction, I mean, we've got some erosion, maybe some settling in some soil someplace. Let's go manage that. This is a problem. It's an issue we need to address. Looking for your discharges, you're looking for stuff like, is there a new staining, a new color? Is there a new sediment deposit? You're never gonna stop erosion. There was zero humans involved in the creation of the Grand Canyon. So even if I have 100% grass, we're still going to have some erosion. So that means some sediment's going to come out of here. But if I notice there's a change in the color of the sediment here, why is it different than the other sediment that may be present here? Or there's a different color water or staining or whatever. I need to now chase this back and figure out where this is coming from. So that's why it's important for you to keep up with your inspections and your monitoring to check those out here. The check outfalls once per permit cycle in Ohio for phase 1 MS4s, Edith was saying. So yeah, I mean, each of you has a different permit, right? Each of you has your MS4 phase 1 or phase 2 or Oklahoma or Virginia or Oregon or whatever. So you need to know what your permit states, right? So make sure that you're following through with that stuff. And then the final thing before we wrap up here is you got to perform these non-stormwater screenings. That means sometimes I have to send video equipment inside of these things because I haven't been blessed with X-ray vision yet, but maybe there's some people that are doing some sort of illegal tapping or blocking the lines or whatever. And so you won't know what you can't see. So there's a recommendation that you do a video at least once per permit cycle, maybe twice, to make sure that you're checking for those locations and being able to then go in and do the management of those illegal or illicit connections that you might have. So in this session review, real quick, introduction, we talked about that. We went into the non-stormwater discharges. We mentioned the 6 minimum control measures. I talked with you a little bit about your mapping and planning. You got it, and why that's important. We went through a list of generating sites. I gave you some information about the monitoring and inspections, doing your quantitative and your qualitative analysis, etc. And as we wrap up here, keep in mind, if you want to take our online courses, we've got QR codes here, or go to stormwater1.com. And when you sign up as a participant in Stormwater Awareness Week, you can get 15% off by putting the code in there. That's all I've got. Please let me know if you got any questions. But otherwise, we'll wrap it up.
All right. Thank you, Brad, for an amazing presentation today. It was really, really great. I know I learned a lot for sure. And thank you for everybody else for coming out and joining us for Stormwater Awareness Week. We still have quite a few workshops today. And right along to go alongside this one, exploring SPCC plans and hazardous waste management in California, happening at 10 o'clock. So if you haven't already, go ahead and check that one out. Again, thank you for joining us for Stormwater Awareness Week. If you missed any part of this workshop or want to review it later, a recorded version will be available within the next 24 to 48 hours for you as well at stormwaterawareness.org. So again, thank you, Brad, for coming out and presenting today.